Welcome back. Now, the Ministry of Health and Social Services last week called for the public submission on the regulation and controlled use of cannabis and cannabis-related products. Now, last week, the International Narcotics Board reported that 33 countries in the world have permitted the cultivation of cannabis for medical and research purposes. Cannabis expert, that is Angela Prusa, has now welcomed this and now joins us with more details on this matter. Thank you so much for joining us, Angela. You are joining us from the UK. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Very well. Now, you have been advocating, that is, for the use of cannabis over the years. And
Yes.
it's now, there seems to be light. Please talk to us about this.
So, yeah, I mean, we welcome the fact that the government is finally engaging with the public on this matter, although 10 days is a very minimal time to get a real picture of the opinion of the public, especially because a lot of the users of cannabis live in rural areas, don't have access to Wi-Fi, don't have an email address, and English is not their first language. So I do feel that the time limit and the way that the information is made accessible is a cause for concern and will not give a realistic overview of basically the support there is for cannabis legalization in Namibia.
What would have been then ideal for the ministry to get opinions from the people, if it's not through emails?
Well, I think first and foremost, it should have been translated into, the local Namibian languages as well. Damara, Herero, Ovambo, some of the main languages spoken within Namibia, and there should be more time allocated so that we could do the work on the ground to actually go out into the community, speak to the people, explain the questions to them, because I have a lot of emails from people who are not understanding the questions and who find the information inaccessible. They don't know where to send the emails to, so it's difficult for people to really partake unless you're living in the city and you have access to Wi-Fi and you know how to use an email. Then you can give your opinion, but otherwise not, and we know that a huge majority of Namibians, don't have that access.
Okay, good. We take a note of that concern. Now, many people in society say that cannabis is harmful and the legalization of it will increase the violent crimes as well as drug addiction. What is your take on that?
Well, my take on that is that people need to be researching this topic more because it has been shown in countries where legalization has occurred that the sky does not fall in, that all hell does not break loose. Contrary, actually, in most countries or even states, for example, in the US where cannabis is legalized, the rate of youth use, so that is underage use, seems to drop. And we are already using cannabis in Namibia. A huge, significant percentage of the population uses cannabis. It is not like all of a sudden, when cannabis is legal, people are going to get violent because they're using it. These are all, people tend to make a lot of claims that are unsupported by evidence and by research. And this evidence and this research is out there. So I urge the government as well as our public to go and research these matters, because these are unfound statements, without evidence.
Now, Angela, let's talk about the best way of going about legalizing cannabis in Namibia. What would be ideal?
Ideal for Namibia would be to legalize cannabis in a manner that benefits the communities. What we've seen, people often refer to other countries in Africa that have legalized cannabis, but that's not the case. For example, Lesotho, for example, Zimbabwe, what they have is a model where they are cultivating cannabis and they are exporting it. And the local people are still being arrested for cannabis. It is foreign corporates that are allowed to grow cannabis because they have purchased a license that was extremely expensive. And so they grow cannabis and they export it. And we need to avoid this in Namibia because we have the potential to include all of our communities in various cannabis industries. You know, cannabis has the potential that we can be making paper from it, we can be making plastics from it, we can be making textiles from it, we can be making food for humans as well as animals, we can be making ropes, we can be making medicines for people. So there is a lot of potential to create an industry where the whole of the country can engage in, but we need to make sure that the regulation and the system around it that is put in place is a system that will support all of this. And so this is why, for me personally, the Fields of Green for All manifesto that was set out by the Dachau couple in South Africa for legalization, and unfortunately has not been adopted by the government, is the way to progress, because it as well looks at traditional use within Africa, because our system should be different to the systems in Europe and in the West, because we have a different relationship to cannabis. Our history with cannabis is different. And so we need to respect all these, all these things and make sure that we include everyone, especially the marginalized communities, especially the ones that have been criminalized by prohibition. And so it's really important that the government engages the agencies on the ground. The government does not have the expertise to deal with this by itself or make these regulations because the government does not know cannabis. And the government does not have that connection to the community. So there is an amazing PDF file detailing all of this, and I urge the public to go and look at it. It is called The Fields of Green for All, and it is the manifesto, the desired outcomes of how legalization within Southern Africa should look like.
Now, let's talk about the concerns, address the concerns that the use of marijuana will lead the users to more dangerous and more expensive drugs. What's your take on that?
I mean, that statement was uttered by one of the government officials in an interview I did yesterday, and I can very confidently say that that statement that is not true. Cannabis is not a gateway drug. Alcohol, on the other hand, is a gateway drug. And alcohol is a drug. And alcohol as well is a very harmful drug. I want to quickly, just to back this claim up that I'm making, there was a multidisciplinary study done over a number of years in the UK as well as Europe, evidence-based research by various professors with a lot of background in neuroscience, in all sorts of sectors. And they did a study on the harms of substances.
Yeah.
And let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can see that, yeah.
Okay.
The harms caused by drugs, yeah.
The harms caused by drugs to
Yes.
the user as well as society. And as you can see right here at the top, alcohol.
We see alcohol there at the top, yes.
And then we have heroin, which is essentially, codeine falls into the same family as heroin, yet codeine, again, freely available in Namibia.
Yeah.
And here you see tobacco, and then only down here is cannabis. And so if sugar would be a prohibited substance, it would be probably before alcohol. So when we look at substances, we really need to start looking at the evidence and at the research behind it, and not at what our opinion is or what we perceive the reality of it to be. Cannabis is not a gateway drug. Alcohol is a gateway drug.
Okay. Now, we have seen countries such as South Africa, Zimbabwe, as well as Lesotho making significant steps in the legalization of cannabis regulation in those countries. Why is it that Namibia has not shown interest in this yet?
Well, I think there's obviously a fear of what is going to happen when we legalize. there's a lack of education and a lack of willingness to look at the evidence and the research that is out there. And I think that is attached to fear and to stigma. You know, for 100 years, we've been told how detrimental cannabis is. You know, the reason cannabis was made illegal in the first place by the South African colonial government in the apartheid time was as a racist narrative, you know, to control black people and Indian slaves.
But
So
if you
there
are,
was
now,
no
Angela,
evidence in
just to
terms of
come in
its
there.
harm.
Now, Angela, just to come in there, if you are saying it was
Yeah.
colonized during the apartheid era, is a history of traditional use of cannabis in Namibia before that?
Yeah, we do. We have a traditional use of cannabis in Namibia for medicine as well as for spiritual purposes. That use exists. And if you now go up to the north, you know, especially like on the border of Angola, places in the north, people are still feeding it to their animals. They're making tea, you know. You can go to the communities in Namibia, everyone will tell you a recipe that they've used in the past for asthma, making a tea, that they've used for the children if they have fever, if there's a runny stomach, you know, a tea that they make for the animals to drink should they be sick. So there is a use. And the prohibition of cannabis, what it did was it just criminalized people for using a plant, you know, and that racist narrative continues today because disproportionately black people and brown people, you know, in our communities are affected by criminalization of cannabis. They are arrested in greater numbers. Often they cannot pay the bail, so they sit in jail for months, you know, without sentencing. So it is a racist apartheid law that needs to be amended, that was not based on science or evidence. And that it's out there, that information, you know. This is not something that I'm pulling out of my fingers.
Yeah.
This is a fact, and our government needs to engage in this. I understand that people are scared, but what people also need to understand, we are already using cannabis in Namibia.
Yeah.
If you don't want to use cannabis, you don't have to use cannabis. But it is our constitutional right under a democracy that should we choose to use cannabis to relax after work, treat ourselves with cannabis as a medicine, or want to make paper or bricks out of cannabis, that we should be able to do so without being criminalized.
Great. Thank you so much, Angela. We'll be following up this story as the opinions come in to the Ministry of Health, and we'll be engaging you in the weeks to come. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that was Angela Prusa, based in the UK. She's a cannabis expert, talking to us about the call for the regulation of controlled use of cannabis and cannabis-related products.